To understand Thomas Sankara, one must first examine the structure he inherited. Upper Volta gained formal independence from France in 1960, but independence did not equal autonomy. The country remained system commonly known as Francafrique, a formal network of political, financial, and military dependency linking former colonies to Paris. France supplied the CFA France currency, technical advisors, budget stabilization support. In return, Upper Volta economy remained oriented towards French market, especially cotton and gold. The structure, political survival for local elites, but limited structural transformation. By 1980, GDP per capita was under $150. Literacy remained at 12%. Nearly 90% of the citizens lived in rural areas with minimal infrastructure. Medical access was critically low. This was not a sudden collapse. It was long-term stagnation. The rotation of power in Upper Volta was a vital one. Leadership passed through Maurice Yemilgo, Sanguel Lamizina Shaye Zebo. Each change was presented as reform, but the economic model remained unchanged. The urban civil service was protected, rural productivity funded the state, foreign alignment remained intact. But in 1982, the Council of the Popular Salvation took control under Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo. To balance internal military faction, he appointed a young captain as a prime minister in January 1983, known as Thomas Sankara. He was 33 years old, charismatic, direct, uncompromising. He did not speak of language of accommodation. He spoke the language of sovereignty.
La dette, c'est aussi la conséquence des affrontements. Et lorsque l'on nous parle aujourd'hui de crise économique, on oublie de nous dire que la crise n'est pas venue de façon subite. La crise existe de tout temps. Et elle ira en s'aggravant chaque fois que les masses populaires seront de plus en plus conscientes de leurs droits face aux exploiteurs. Il y a crise aujourd'hui parce que les masses refusent que les richesses soient concentrées entre les mains de quelques individus.
Within months, he had mobilized students, unions, segments of the military. Foreign observers grew cautious. In May 1983, after a high level of diplomatic engagement with France, Sankara was dismissed and placed under house restriction. The intention was contentment. Instead, it triggered reorganization. The August 4 revolution was a dynamic one. When leadership is detained, movements either collapse or disperse. Sankara network reorganized. The operational center shifted from Paul near Ghanaian border. The Paul garrison housed the center, the entertainment commando, that is, the army's elite training base, and had its commander as captain Blaise Compaoré. Between May and August 1983, coordination intensified among Blaise Compaoré, Henry Zongo, and Jean-Baptiste Lingani. Planning was methodical. The objective was not spectacle. It was rapid institutional control. August 4, 1983, at approximately 7 p.m., dispersed unit began advancing towards Ouagadougou. They moved in civilian vehicle to reduce detection. Their priority targets were clear: the national radio, to be able to control public communication, telecommunication hub, to limit external coordination. The presidential palace was a symbolic authority, so they needed to get that one too. The main barracks for military neutrality, then Sankara's residence for leadership restoration. By 9 p.m., organized resistance had faded. Several rank-and-file soldiers declined to oppose the advancing units. At 10 p.m., Thomas Sankara addressed the nation by radio. The National Council of Revolution was declared. The Upper Volta had entered a new phase. The first 100 days focused on institutional redesign. October 1983, People's Revolutionary Tribunals were introduced. These tribunals were publicly broadcast. Former officials were tried for corruption and economic misconduct. Defendants spoke without legal representation. Panels consisted of workers and peasants. The intent was symbolic. Elite immunity was dismantled. November 1983, the land reform was enacted. Traditional land monopolies were abolished. All land was declared state property. The land belongs to those who work it. Millions of farmers shifted allegiance from hereditary chiefs to central authority. This was unbecoming for most elites. On August 4, 1984, the Upper Volta became Burkina Faso, land of upright people. The renaming was not cosmetic. It signaled psychological independence. The national anthem was written by Sankara himself. The social policy shift made forced marriages to be prohibited. Female genital mutilation was banned. Women were appointed to senior government roles. A symbolic national market day required men to manage domestic duties. It was not theatrical, it was structural messaging. The housing and economic reforms touched the economy. The urban rents were suspended temporarily. Public housing programs used compressed earth bricks rather than imported cement. Foreign currency use declined. Local labor markets expanded. Government luxury vehicles were sold. Senior officer salaries were reduced. Fiscal austerity targeted the elite, not the rural majority. By January 1985, a nationwide vaccination campaign was launched. Within 15 days, approximately 2.5 million children received immunizations. Schools and local offices functioned as temporary clinics. The campaign operated without World Bank financing. It demonstrated mobilization capacity. December 1985, a brief border conflict occurred with Mali over Agacha Strip. Burkina Faso relied on mobile infantry tactics. A ceasefire was mediated by the Organization of African Unity. The conflict revealed external vulnerability, but internal cohesion held. Urban wood cutting restrictions were introduced. Approximately 10 million trees were planted to slow desertification. Hundreds of wells were constructed. Water access improved agricultural stability. Faso Danfani, locally woven cotton, became mandatory attire for state officials. This policy stimulated domestic textile production and reduced import dependence. By 1986, cereal production has risen significantly. School enrollment increased. Infant mortality declined. Village pharmacies expanded access to medicine. The state was transforming. At the 1987 OAU Summit, Sankara delivered a speech criticizing Africa's external debt structure. He argued that collective refusal to repay unsustainable debt was necessary for survival. The speech intensified diplomatic strain. Burkina Faso was no longer merely reformist, it was confrontational.
Tous nous souhaitons notre conférence adopte la nécessité de dire clairement que nous ne pouvons pas payer la dette. Non pas dans un esprit belliqueux, belliciste. Ceci pour éviter que nous n'allions individuellement nous faire assassinat. Si le Burkina Faso tout seul refuse de payer la dette, je ne serai pas là à la prochaine conférence.
Domestically, tension increased. In August 1987, a teacher's strike resulted in mass dismissals. Urban intellectual support eroded. Internal alliance weakened. By October 15, 1987, approximately 2:30 p.m., Sankara departed for a routine CNR meeting at the Council d'Ente. At 4:30 p.m., vehicles entered the compound. At speed, an armed detachment advanced. Gunfire erupted. Security personnel hesitated upon recognizing familiar faces. Control shifted rapidly. Inside the meeting hall, Sankara instructed colleagues to remain calm. He stepped forward. The forensic investigation later confirmed he was struck by concentrated automatic fire. His presidency ended instantly. Several officials present were also unalived during the operation. The transition lasted minutes. The consequences lasted decades. One of the lessons or one of the controversial news, the unalive of Sankara was strictly planned by those around him, especially those working directly under his command. At the evening, a radio broadcast announced rectification. The narrative framed the event as ideological correction. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves. Power consolidated under Blaise Compaoré. One of the famous moments of the event that happened when Thomas Sankara was unalived was that he said, "Don't worry, it is me they want." And then he stepped aside while telling his household to remain inside. Thomas Sankara governed for 4 years. He reduced elite privilege, increased agricultural output, expanded vaccination coverage, promoted women's rights, encouraged economic self-reliance. But his authority rested on a fragile balance. Popular legitimacy on one side, military command on one side. When those forces diverged, structural collapse followed. Revolutions require institutional depth, security cohesion, succession planning. Sankara transformed the nation, but he did not fully secure the instrument of force. Power determines duration. Integrity determines legacy. His presidency ended in 1987, but his influence did not. Today, Thomas Sankara is one of the 2-3 names you will mention, and most people recently relate his ideology to that of Ibrahim Traore. What are the proximity rules? Your most dangerous enemy is not the one across the border, but the one sitting at your table. Monitor the second in command with more intensity than the enemy in chief. The security sentiment: a leader cannot afford brothers. In power, they are only allies and assassins. Sankara's refusal to arrest Compaoré was his ultimate tactical failure. If you do not control the communication infrastructure, you cannot call the reinforcement. Always have a second plan. Always have a deductant sovereign communication loop. If the state collapses when the leader is gone, the leader had failed to build a state. Build systems that can survive on its own when you are no longer there. Unaliving a leader often makes his ideology immortal. Compaoré ruled for 27 years, but he could never erase the data of Sankara's 4 years. Structure determines duration, but integrity determines legacy. Why did the upright man fall? It was a failure of internal security architecture. Blaise Compaoré was a tactical hand of the revolution. He controlled the elite paratroopers. Sankara, believing in power of their own brotherhood, allowed Compaoré to hold top military command, while Sankara focused on social policy. Sankara had the soft power, the people, but Compaoré had the hard power, the guns. In 1987, when Sankara proposed creating a revolutionary vanguard party to professionalize the CDRs, the military officers felt their influence were being diluted. They chose to strike before they were replaced.